Beyond the veil of ordinary reality lies a world where the impossible becomes terrifyingly real. Tonight, we invite you to journey with us through 4 macabre tales that will challenge what you believe about the nature of our world. From the mysterious figure that appears in a backyard each night but vanishes from all recordings, to the oripient voices that emanate from behind walls in a family's new home, these stories explore the thin boundary between our world and what might exist just beyond our perception. Join us as we unravel the sobrenatural encounter of a rideshare driver with a passenger who shouldn't exist, and the terrorizing realization of 5 friends who discover their group once included someone they've collectively forgotten, or perhaps, someone who never existed at all. These tales will leave you questioning the shadows in your own home and filling you with medo of what might be watching from the darkness. Some mysteries are better left unsolved, but tonight, we dare to seek answers. It ain't every day that someone's backyard becomes a stage for the unexplained, but that's exactly what happened to Thomas Miller last fall. He'd been living in his suburban home for nearly 15 years before the macabre appearances began, a motionless figure, standing still as a statue under the old oak tree at precisely 2 a.m. What started as a fleeting shadow soon became a terrorizing nightly occurrence that left Thomas questioning his own sanity and safety. You know how they say technology never lies? Well, here's where things get truly oripient. Thomas set up motion-triggered cameras, high-definition security systems, and even infrared detectors throughout his property. He was certain he'd catch whoever, or whatever, was trespassing on his property. But morning after morning, he checked the footage only to find nothing. Not a single frame captured the stranger that his own eyes had witnessed just hours before, standing there, watching his bedroom window. The mind plays tricks on us, doesn't it? That's what Thomas's friends kept telling him, insisting that stress or lack of sleep was creating these sobrenatural visions. It's just your imagination, they'd say with nervous laughter. But how could imagination explain the footprints he found in the dewy grass each morning? Or the way his dog would growl low in its throat, hackles raised, staring at that same spot even during daylight hours? Thomas started dreading nightfall. He'd pace his living room as darkness settled, feeling that familiar sense of medo creeping up his spine like ivy on an abandoned house. The rational part of his brain kept searching for logical explanations, perhaps a neighbor sleepwalking, a teenager playing pranks, or even a homeless person seeking temporary shelter. Yet none of these explanations could account for the stranger's consistent timing or their ability to evade every camera. By the 3rd week, Thomas couldn't take it anymore. He decided to confront the situation head-on, despite the macabre possibilities that swirled in his mind. Armed with nothing but a flashlight and his dwindling courage, he waited by his back door, watching the digital clock on his microwave tick toward that dreaded hour. His heart hammered against his ribs like it was trying to escape what his eyes were about to witness. The air grew colder as 2 a.m. approached, unnaturally cold for that time of year. Thomas's breath clouded in front of him, though the heating was on full blast. The hairs on his arms stood at attention, responding to some terrorizing shift in the atmosphere that science couldn't explain. And then, right on time, the figure appeared, not walking into view, not approaching from the woods beyond, but simply there, as if it had materialized from the darkness itself. Have you ever felt that paralyzing fear that roots you to the spot? That's what happened to Thomas. Despite all his preparations and determination, he couldn't move a muscle. The stranger stood perfectly still, face obscured by shadows, wearing what appeared to be outdated clothing that hung loosely on its frame. What struck Thomas most wasn't the figure's appearance, but the profound sense of wrongness it emanated, like looking at a photograph where something subtle has been distorted. Thomas's neighbors started noticing changes in him, dark circles beneath bloodshot eyes, a perpetual jumpiness, and a sobrenatural pallor to his once healthy complexion. "You look like you've seen a ghost," his colleague remarked one morning, not realizing how close that casual observation might be to the truth. Thomas had stopped inviting friends over, couldn't bear to explain why he'd installed blackout curtains, or why he refused to look toward the backyard after sunset. The breaking point came when Thomas woke one night to find muddy footprints leading from his back door through the kitchen, up the stairs, and stopping just outside his bedroom. The oripient trail ended abruptly, as if its creator had simply vanished. Yet his security system, which should have captured any intruder, showed nothing but empty hallways and undisturbed rooms. The police were called, but they found no signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been in the house besides Thomas himself. In a desperate bid for answers, Thomas began researching his property's history. What he discovered sent waves of medo coursing through him. 30 years before his home was built, a man had been found dead under circumstances that remained unsolved, his body discovered on exactly the same spot where the stranger now appeared nightly. The newspaper clippings described a figure seen wandering the then vacant lot for weeks before disappearing altogether. As Thomas stared at the grainy photograph accompanying the article, his blood turned to ice water in his veins. The face looking back at him was one he'd come to know all too well, that of his nightly visitor, unchanged by the passing decades. The Martinez family couldn't believe their luck when they purchased the Victorian home at half its market value. Sarah, Miguel, and their 2 children had been saving for years, and this supernatural opportunity seemed too good to pass up. The previous owners had moved out in quite a hurry, but real estate is full of such mysteries, isn't it? The spacious rooms and ornate woodwork charmed them instantly, making it easy to ignore the slight chill that persisted despite the summer heat or the way sounds seemed to echo differently than they should. It wasn't until their 3rd night that they first heard them, whispers, so faint they might have been the house settling or pipes expanding. "Did you say something?" became their most frequent question to one another. Little Emma, only 6 years old, was the first to articulate what they were all experiencing. "And the people in the walls are talking again, Mummy." Sarah had dismissed it as childhood imagination, but the macabre certainty in her daughter's eyes made her stomach twist with an emotion she couldn't quite name. "You know how sometimes you'll catch movement from the corner of your eye, but when you turn to look, nothing's there?" That's how the whispers operated, clearly audible when you weren't straining to hear them, disappearing into background noise when you focused. Miguel began recording at night, placing his phone against different walls throughout the house. What he captured sent a terrorizing chills down his spine, fragmented conversations, discussions of the family's daily activities, and occasionally, their names spoken by voices they didn't recognize. The children's behavior changed first. 10-year-old Lucas began sleepwalking, always ending up in the same spot, pressing his ear against the basement wall with an expression of intense concentration. Emma started leaving toys arranged in perfect circles, claiming they had asked her to. When questioned about who they were, she would point wordlessly to the walls, her small face contorted with an adult kind of medo that no child should ever have to experience. Sarah contacted the previous owners, hoping for some rational explanation. The conversation was brief and irreverent in its implications. "We thought moving would stop it," the woman said, her voice trembling. "We thought they wouldn't follow us." Before Sarah could press for details, the line went dead. Subsequent calls went unanswered, and Sarah discovered their listed address was now a vacant lot, as if the family had disappeared completely from existence. Have you ever felt a house watching you? The Martinez family began to sense eyes on them constantly, not from outside, but from within the very structure that should have been their sanctuary. The whispers grew more insistent, sometimes rising to audible words that echoed through hallways when no one else was home. "We've been waiting," they'd say. Or, "Join us." Or most disturbingly, "We know where you sleep." Miguel began noticing strange imperfections in the walls, places where the plaster bulged slightly, as if something behind it was pressing outward. The breaking point came during a particularly severe thunderstorm. As lightning illuminated the house in strobing flashes, shadows seemed to move independently across the walls. Following some macabre instinct he couldn't explain, Miguel took a hammer to the basement wall where Lucas was drawn during his sleepwalking episodes. The plaster crumbled away with unexpected ease, revealing not the expected wooden studs and insulation, but a dark, narrow passage that shouldn't have existed according to any floor plan they'd seen. It's fascinating how curiosity can override fear, isn't it? Despite every horror movie rule screaming against it, Miguel and Sarah found themselves drawn to explore what lay beyond. Armed with only flashlights and the foolish courage of homeowners with an underwater mortgage, they ventured into the passage. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the musty scent of earth and something else, something supernatural and chemical that burned their nostrils and made their eyes water. The passage opened into a room that, by all architectural logic, shouldn't exist, a space approximately 15 by 15 feet, with no visible ventilation or natural light sources. The walls were covered in writing, thousands upon thousands of words, dates, and symbols, some freshly scrawled, others faded with apparent age. And there, scattered across the dirt floor, lay personal items belonging to previous inhabitants, toys similar to those their children played with, articles of clothing, photographs of families standing proudly before the very house they now occupied, dating back nearly a century. The terrorizing revelation came when they spotted their own family portrait, one taken just days before moving in, already pinned to the wall amidst the others. Next to it, freshly written in what appeared to be red chalk, "The walls are thinnest between worlds here." As if responding to their discovery, the whispers suddenly surged in volume, no longer coming from the walls but seemingly from the air itself, dozens of voices speaking in unison with crystalline clarity, "You found us. Now we can find you." The temperature plummeted, and their flashlight beams caught glimpses of figures shifting in the darkness, not solid enough to be people, yet too substantial to be mere shadows. Frozen with Mido, Sarah, and Miguel watched as handprints began appearing on the dirt floor, advancing toward them as if invisible bodies were crawling closer. The room itself seemed to pulse like a living heart, the walls expanding and contracting with each collective whisper. What happened next would fundamentally alter their understanding of reality, and the floor beneath the handprints began to distort, revealing not solid earth but glimpses into what appeared to be another version of the same room, occupied by pale, gaunt figures staring upward with hollow eyes, their mouths moving in perfect synchronization with the whispers. Jack Harmon had been driving for rideshare companies for nearly 3 years now, long enough to have collected dozens of stories about drunk passengers, forgotten items, and awkward conversations. But nothing in his experience had prepared him for that terrorizing Tuesday night in October. The rain had been falling steadily since sunset, creating halos around streetlights and transforming the asphalt into a dark mirror that reflected the world in distorted ripples. It was just past midnight when his app pinged with a new request, a pickup on Ravens Creek Road, a rural stretch notorious for its sharp turns and poor lighting. Jack hesitated briefly, and something about the location seemed off. That supernatural sixth sense that alerts us to danger was whispering warnings, but in this economy, who could afford to turn down a fare? He accepted the ride and navigated his sedan through the increasingly heavy downpour, windshield wipers fighting a losing battle against nature's fury. You know that feeling when the back of your neck prickles for no apparent reason? That's what happened to Jack as he pulled up to the coordinates. There was no house in sight, just a lengthy stretch of empty road flanked by ancient oaks whose branches reached toward each other like skeletal fingers. And yet, standing alone in the deluge without an umbrella or raincoat, was a young woman in a white dress that should have been soaked through but somehow appeared merely damp. Her dark hair hung in perfect waves despite the weather, and her pale skin seemed to glow against the macabre backdrop of twisted trees and midnight shadows. "You headed into town?" Jack called through the passenger window, trying to mask the inexplicable meter that had crept into his voice. The woman nodded without speaking and slid into the backseat with fluid grace. In his review mirror, Jack noticed she carried no purse, no phone, nothing but a small silver locket clutched in her delicate fingers. The car's interior light had flickered briefly as she entered, then stabilized, though a persistent chill now permeated the previously warm cabin. Jack turned up the heat and pulled back onto the road, stealing occasional glances at his unusual passenger. The conversation started normally enough. "Bad night to be caught without a ride," Jack offered, desperate to break the uncomfortable silence. Her response came after a beat too long, her voice carrying an irreverent quality, like wind through autumn leaves or distant wind chimes. "I've been waiting a long time," she said, "but they never come back for me." Jack nodded as if this made perfect sense, though alarm bells were clanging in his mind. He noticed she wasn't reflected in his review mirror, but he blamed it on the angle and poor lighting, refusing to consider more impossible explanations. "Have you ever tried to make small talk when every instinct is screaming at you to run?" Jack kept up a steady stream of casual chatter as they drove, about the weather, about the upcoming holiday, about anything to maintain the illusion of normalcy. His passenger responded with increasing animation, describing a life that somehow seemed out of sync with modern references. She spoke of places in town that had been replaced decades ago, mentioned a mayor who'd been out of office for nearly 30 years, and referred to upcoming events that Jack realized, with mounting supernatural dread, had occurred in the distant past. The temperature inside the car continued to drop despite the heater running at full blast. Jack's breath now clouded in front of him, though his passengers did not. When he asked for her specific destination, she simply pointed ahead and murmured, "Just past the old mill bridge." Jack's hands tightened on the wheel. The mill bridge had collapsed in a flood sometime in the 1980s. He'd been driving over its modern replacement, known locally as New Bridge, though this woman spoke of the original structure as if it still stood. His macabre suspicions were crystallizing into a theory he couldn't bring himself to acknowledge. "What brought you out to Ravens Creek Road tonight?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady as they approached the bridge. Her answer sent ice water coursing through his veins. "My fiancé and I had an argument. He drove off and left me there to teach me a lesson." She twisted the silver locket between her fingers. "I started walking, but it was raining so hard. I just wanted to get home." Something in her tone shifted, becoming hollow, distant. "I never saw the car coming around the bend. They didn't even stop." Jack felt his heart pounding against his ribs like it wanted to escape what his mind was finally beginning to accept. It's fascinating how the human brain will fight against impossible truths, isn't it? Jack kept driving, kept talking, as if maintaining this charade would somehow protect him from the terrorizing reality sitting in his backseat. When they crossed the bridge, she asked him to stop at the small memorial garden that had been planted alongside the road, a place Jack had passed hundreds of times without giving much thought to the weathered wooden cross partially hidden among wildflowers. As they pulled over, she spoke again, her voice now seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere simultaneously. "This is where they found me." Jack turned to look at his passenger directly for the first time since she'd entered his car, overcoming the meter that had kept his eyes fixed firmly on the road. The backseat was empty. A cold that had nothing to do with the weather enveloped him as he stepped out of the car, drawn by some force beyond his understanding toward the memorial. The wooden cross bore a faded name, Elizabeth Winters, and a date exactly 43 years earlier. Attached to the cross was a tarnished silver locket identical to the one his passenger had been holding. With trembling fingers, Jack opened it to find two photographs, a young man, and the woman who had been sitting in his backseat just moments before. The true Euripient epilogue to Jack's experience came the following day. Unable to shake the encounter, he researched Elizabeth Winters at the local library's archives. The yellowed newspaper clippings confirmed a 22-year-old woman had indeed been killed in a hit-and-run on that stretch of road, wearing a white dress, walking home after an argument with her fiancé. But what caused Jack to abandon his rideshare job permanently was the final detail in the article. Elizabeth had survived for several minutes after being struck, using her dying breath to describe the vehicle that hit her, a dark sedan, identical in make and model to Jack's own car, driven by someone who never stopped, never came back for her. The annual camping trip had become something of a tradition for the five friends who'd met in college, a chance to disconnect from their increasingly digital lives and reconnect with each other under star-filled skies. This year, they'd chosen Blackwood Pine Campground, a remote location nestled deep in national forest land, miles from the nearest cell signal or paved road. As they set up their tents in a clearing surrounded by ancient trees, and a terrorizing feeling settled over them, a sensation that despite the isolation, they weren't entirely alone in these woods. It started with little things, you know? Items that weren't quite where they'd been left, extra footprints around the campfire that no one claimed, a sixth camp chair that everyone assumed belonged to someone else. "Did anyone invite Matt this year?" Jason asked on the second night, gazing at the empty chair positioned perfectly within their circle. The question hung in the air, creating an instant atmosphere of macabre confusion. Each friend looked to the others, waiting for someone to claim responsibility for the phantom invitee. But Samantha, Alex, Lisa, and Derek all shook their heads, each assuming another had extended the invitation. Have you ever experienced that cold rush of fear that seems to start at your scalp and cascade down your spine? That's what swept through the group as they realized no one had invited anyone named Matt. Yet somehow, they all recognized the name. It felt familiar on their tongues, conjured a vague image in their minds of someone they should know but couldn't quite picture. Maybe one of us mentioned inviting him earlier, Derek suggested, though his voice carried an undercurrent of supernatural doubt. And we just prepared for him subconsciously. The explanation was flimsy, but they clung to it, desperate to avoid considering more impossible alternatives. That night, they took photos around the campfire, trying to recapture the easy camaraderie that had suddenly become strained. When Samantha reviewed the images on her digital camera, her blood turned to ice. In 3 consecutive photos, a 6th figure appeared at the edge of the frame, blurry, features indistinct, but unmistakably human-shaped. "Guys," she whispered, her voice trembling with medo, "I think someone's watching us." The friends huddled around the small screen, each feeling that peculiar dual response of wanting to look away while being unable to tear their eyes from the oripient anomaly captured in pixels. As darkness deepened and the forest around them grew loud with nighttime sounds, the friends unconsciously positioned themselves closer to the fire, as if its light offered some protection against the impossibility they were facing. Their conversation became forced, punctuated by long silences during which they all found themselves stealing glances at the empty chair, except the chair wasn't always empty. More than once, each friend thought they glimpsed someone sitting there from the corner of their eye, only to find nothing but vacant space when they turned to look directly. The breaking point came just after midnight. Lisa had been telling a story about their sophomore year when she suddenly stopped mid-sentence, her expression transforming from animated to macabre realization. "The ski trip," she whispered. "Don't you remember? Matt was with us on the ski trip." One by one, memories began to surface, not like normal recollections, but like something being downloaded into their consciousness. They remembered Matt Peterson, a quiet engineering student who had joined their friend group during second semester. They remembered inviting him to this very camping trip. And most to terrorize Annie of all, they remembered him arriving with them, setting up his tent just beyond Derek's. It's odd how the human mind can simultaneously accept and reject information, isn't it? The 5 friends now clearly remembered a 6th, could recall conversations they'd had with Matt since arriving at the campground, could even describe what he was wearing. Yet they were equally certain they'd arrived as only 5, had set up only 5 tents, had brought supplies for only 5 people. "This doesn't make any sense," Alex said, voicing what they were all thinking. "Either we're collectively losing our minds, or..." He couldn't finish the thought. The alternative was too supernatural to articulate. Derek was the first to approach the space where they suddenly remembered Matt's tent should be. The clearing showed no signs of disturbance, no flattened grass, no tent stakes, no personal belongings. And yet, as they stood there, more details emerged in their shared memory, and Matt had brought a blue 2-person tent, had complained about a rock under his sleeping bag, had borrowed Derek's extra flashlight because his own batteries had died. These recollections felt as real and solid as their memories of the drive to the campground or the hike they'd taken earlier that day. The night stretched on with none of them able to sleep, each friend wrestling with mounting medo and confusion. Around 3 a.m., Samantha bolted upright from where she'd been dozing against a log. "The group photo," she gasped. "From graduation. Check your phones." Though reception was non-existent, they still had access to previously downloaded content. One by one, they pulled up photos from their university graduation ceremony 3 years earlier. And there he was, standing between Jason and Lisa in the formal group shot, his arm around Lisa's shoulders, his face unremarkable yet instantly recognizable now that they were looking directly at it. Matt Peterson, the friend they'd somehow collectively forgotten, then remembered, who wasn't actually with them on this trip. Or was he? As dawn broke through the trees, casting long shadows across their campsite, Alex made a discovery that caused the blood to drain from his face. In the visitor log at the campground entrance, which they'd all signed upon arrival, there were 6 names, not 5. The last signature, written in handwriting none of them recognized yet all found disturbingly familiar, read Matthew Peterson. Below it, in the same hand but different ink as if added later, were the words "Don't forget me again." When they returned to their campsite, the sixth chair was gone. In its place lay a Polaroid photograph of all six of them, taken at this very campground, dated exactly 1 year earlier, a camping trip none of the 5 friends had any recollection of attending. The Euripient journey down the rabbit hole deepened when they returned to civilization. Alex, the most skeptical among them, contacted their university alumni office. Yes, Matthew Peterson, the administrator, confirmed over the phone. Such a tragedy. One of 6 students in that car accident the week after graduation, but the only fatality. The administrator paused before adding, his friends were lucky to walk away with minor injuries. I believe you were among them, Mr. Reynolds. The 5 friends exchanged looks of horror as fragments of suppressed memories began to surface: a late-night drive, an argument about directions, a sharp curve taken too fast, and Matt, sitting in the middle back seat without a seatbelt, thrown through the windshield on impact.